Hello, everybody. Welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the fall-winter 2023 class, and this is our very first office hour. Welcome to everybody who's watching live and for all the students who are watching after the fact. So first and foremost, I'll introduce myself. My name is Javan Bernakevitch. I own and operate allpointsdesign.ca. That's All Points Design, landscaping and life design company. I've been doing this work since 2009. When I took my very first permaculture design course over on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, at a place called One United Resource Eco Village. I was interested in how do we stay on the planet long term. It's kind of been my guiding force for close to 20 years. And I thought it was natural building. So I went to OUR Eco Village before I took that course to learn about natural building, to learn about we're building with clay, sandstone, straw, wood, other types of materials, cordwood, things like that, like clay infill. And somebody said, hey, we've got a PDC course. Then do you want to take a permaculture design course? And I was born in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. And if people don't know Alberta is kind of like the product of a one-night stand between Montana and Texas, sort of lone ruggeds, woodsman, and bigger, better buck of the Texans. So I heard a deal and I was like, oh, well, I could take this course and it's half off because I was already taking another course. So I took it. And there's a conversation within the Quaker faith where there's multiple ways to say no and multiple ways to say yes. It's one of the best consensus making groups, modern groups, let's say, outside of Indigenous cultures. And what was so interesting is one of the reasons they're called Quakers is that they only speak when they quake, as opposed to modern society. And I think if aliens saw us these days, they would think that we speak because we have to. And if we didn't speak, we would die. So I remember being given the prime directive of permaculture, which is take responsibility for ourselves and for that of our children. And then the 3 ethics, and then David Holmgren's 12 principles, and thinking, this is the closest thing I could imagine to a life ethic to follow for the rest of my existence on the planet. And I'd rather fail at permaculture than succeed at pretty much anything else. So about that time, I jumped in head, hands, and feet into permaculture and quickly realized that there is a huge amount of tools out there that we can use. And permaculture is one tool in the toolbox. So I'm what you would call a lowercase p permaculturalist. Permaculture is not the only tool in my toolbox, but it's a great tool. And just like if we were bringing or asking somebody to come and build our house and they showed up and they pulled out a screwdriver, we would go, oh my God, it's a screwdriverist. We would say, this is a craftsperson who's building a home. It's not even the house that we're after. It's the home we're after. It's that value that we bring to a place. So I had the opportunity to work in Kenya and Cuba. We ran a 21-day PDC in Cuba, which was super fun. We did design and installation at the end of that PDC. In Kenya, I helped to start and name the Practical Permaculture Institutes of Western Africa. And we developed a Practical Permaculture Institute in Kenya, and now there's one in Tanzania. There's a couple of installations in Uganda. I still haven't found somebody to run the institute. So it's an interesting model that allows us to replicate some of the seeing is believing conversation, because in lots of places, it's about the seeing and experiencing and applying. I then started to get more work and people heard about me and started to work together. And about that time, I encountered holistic management, another incredible tool created by Alan Savory. And I encountered holistic decision-making within holistic management. And holistic decision-making turns decision-making on its head from a culturally modern perspective, i.e., go get the house, go get the car, go get the thing, and maybe you'll get the result you're looking for. Instead, we ask, what is the value you're seeking? So somebody once credited me with talking more people out of farming than into it, which is kind of a funny thing to be known for, because there's always going to be these cultural high points. And one of them was when this documentary called Biggest Little Farm came out on Netflix. And if you haven't seen it, it's an interesting film. I'm not going to say it's good. I'm not going to say it's bad. I'm going to say it's interesting. And it's about these 2 individuals who got major financial backing and created a quote unquote permaculture sustainable farm. And for those of us who are in the know and do this work, we saw sort of what they did and how they did it. And we're like, oh, that's about $4 or $5 million they had to do that, which is nice to have. Not everybody does. And we would get a lot of phone calls of people saying, hey, I'd like the biggest little farm. People would call up for a good fit call, sales call, and say, hey, I want the biggest little farm. And when you ask them, well, what is it behind the biggest little farm that's really driving you? You get conversations like, well, I want to be close to my food. I want to know where my food's coming from. I want my kids to grow up in a clean and clean environment. I want to be close to nature. Now, if you hold those values, you don't necessarily have to farm to create those values. And if anyone's ever farmed or done any intensive gardening, you know that it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. There's a reason why we moved away from small scale agriculture. It's because it's a lot of effort. And there's some excellent resources and books I'll name throughout this conversation that we're going to have going on for the next 20 weeks that can help to round out that story for you. And that then brought me to create values-based decision-making, which is an offshoot of holistic decision-making, but really focuses on how do we make decisions for anything, life, projects, farm, because a lot of what Alan Savory does is really based upon broad-scale ranching, which not everybody is doing. So then that added in the life design component of my work. And then we speed up over the last couple of years where I've been working internationally on projects as big as 6,500 hectares and as small as backyards for friends and families and customers and clients and corporations. And I used to live in Canada. My family was keen to try living in another country. So I currently live in Ecuador near the town of Cuenca, where we've been for a year and probably be here for another couple. It's really nice to be back in the tropic climes after being a polar temperate homesteader for many years. It's nice to see all the fruits and all the rest of it. I miss winter for sure. I'm one of those weirdos that enjoys winter and enjoys the downtime. So that's my introduction. I want to jump right into this conversation about gauging your success. So this course is one of my favorite courses, the PDC, and specifically through OSU as of late, because it's adult education, which means that all of you are interested in being in this course because you have some sort of internal motivation. I have friends who teach for the credit side, and sometimes you get people who are like, oh, I think I'll take that. And their motivation to complete assignments and whatnot is not high. Which is frustrating as an instructor because you want to bring people to completion. So normally the PDC brings about a very interesting subsection, a slice of humanity. People who see the future, think it's got some uncertainty, think it's got some issue, and want to do the most that they can. So when we talk about progression and success in this course, you have to submit every single assignment. You have to get 80% on every single assignment, and you have to submit all assignments by the final due date, which is March 11th, not August 28th. Thanks everybody for catching my my boo-boo there. But I am not interested in grades. So I want to give all of you 100% on every assignment. That's my desire. So you can resubmit as much as you like. Basically, once you submit, and we'll go into Canvas quickly here. Once you submit, you can resubmit. You can reply to your initial thread and just say, hey, Javan, here's what I changed. And we'll get into that in a second. But basically, the rubric is there and the grades are there to direct you on what to do. And so what I would recommend is watch the tutorials on each of the slides, read all the information, look at other people's examples, and then do the assignment with in mind that the rubric is there. The reason why I say that is I've got 15 minutes on average for each of you per each assignment. And early on in the course, I tend to take less time, which leaves me like 30 and 45 minutes for the later assignments, which once we get to the zone 1 design and the final design, there's a lot of information in there. And so we'd like to have more information for you. So take the time to read the rubric so that way I don't spend a bunch of times correcting mechanical errors, which are all laid out in the tutorials. And if something isn't, definitely let us know. We've been running with this template for, I think, about 7 classes now, so roughly 2.5 years. So we should have all the kinks worked out, but that doesn't mean we haven't missed something, and we're all human. So if there's something missing, just let me know. Oops is the sound that progress makes. So be open to that. Be open to playing in this class, be open to playing with how you want to render your design. This is not a class about rendering. A lot of folks come into this class thinking we're going to teach you specifically how to render, and we have through Google Slides, but we're not going deep into any type of software. So Google Slides is great because it's accessible, it's free. Most people have used some kind of presentation software, which is what it is. Most people will find a moment of frustration because it doesn't have layers, which if you're that person, that's okay. But the majority of the examples you see have all been done with Google Slides. If you want to switch to another application that you already know, no problems. Do not spend the time during this class to learn a new computer application. If at any point you're thinking this would just be easier by paper and pencil, switch to paper and pencil. You all know how to use a piece of paper. You all know how to use a pencil. You can buy a stencil set and you can definitely go that route. But don't spend the time learning a new application. I just do not recommend it. That said, I will definitely recommend what I use and how I work with this programming and the digital aspects. So we'll take a look at that as well. Have fun with the assignments. We talked about that. Grades are guideposts, not grave. If this is your first class in a long time or since your formal schooling, don't get upset about grades. Just treat them as little guideposts. They're not huge. And dialogues encourage. I tend to give video feedback. So I can see your assignment, you can hear my voice, I can draw on your assignment. It gives you a lot of feedback in a short amount of time. So feel free to dialogue with me, reply back, write out your reply. Let's have a bit of a dialogue. We talked about rendering. Do not become obsessed with it. Let's talk about site selection. Okay. So most important thing with site selection, you have to be able to visit your site multiple times. If this is a site that is either fictitious, like I'm going to use a park in my town, or a friend who lives 3 hours out of town, or you're international and you're currently in some kind of geopolitical or cultural upheaval and your site is too far and it's really hard to get to. We've had students all over the world that have been in major political or social upheavals and haven't been able to get to their site. Just think about having the site close and accessible. I also would recommend making sure that it's not fictitious. It's harder to learn this process if you always have to make up the constraints of the design, and constraints are great. If somebody says we're not doing this here, we're doing this over here, or this is where the wind's coming from, or we're not going to touch this area, or there's a viewscape, those are all constraints that really create the design as we work with it. So make sure you have a design site that's close, that you can visit, and that you have access to. And ideally has a client that you can ask questions to and can respond. So if you have a client that is non-responsive and right at the beginning when we do week one with all the different assignments, they're not responding, you may want to switch as well. Any questions about site selection before I move on? And feel free to put that into the chat or just unmute yourself or raise your hand or whatever. Question from Bjorn. Sorry. My site is 2 hours away. I can visit every other weekend. Would that be enough? Oh yeah, I think so, for sure. The other thing that another student had as a question, which is important for those of us in the temperate climates, is what do we do because we're getting into winter here? So I'm just going to share my screen, bring up the template here. Going to bring me down just to one. Okay. So I'm going to quickly come back to the winter, but first I'm going to talk a little bit about the template. So the template is through Google Earth Pro. You'll have your full tutorials at the top. Watch all tutorials. If you're looking for the full list of video tutorials, it's up here. Generally, there'll be how-tos above, and then there'll be how to complete, how to think about why we have this assignment, all those good things. This will usually be a lot about how to use Google Slides. So if you're new to it, this is a great way to understand and learn. Anything that's blue, anything that's highlighted blue is information for you to read and look at. Anything that's highlighted yellow is for you to replace. So yellow, think, oh, I got to get in there. I've got to replace this. I've got to look at this. Everything else you change. You'll see that there's how-tos on the side, how-tos on the bottom, things for you to change. Now, on the right-hand side here, going back to winter conditions considerations. For those of you in temperate to polar climates, you may want to look ahead at assignments that require a non-frozen or vegetatively bare site. Here are a few assignments to consider working on ahead of fall, winter freeze up. So if you're in a place that doesn't get cold, you don't have to worry about this. If you are, 100% watch this tutorial that I put together here, and make sure you start to prioritize things like the soil assignment, any type of vegetative assay before we lose all of the leaves off the trees, because it's a lot harder to assess, sometimes impossible to assess plants on those criteria. So definitely take a look at that. Okay, back to this. Site design. Perfect. Okay, I'm just going to go back and check chat, see if anybody else put another question. Cool. Does anybody have another question they want to just unmute? Can we keep the blue in our slides, or should we axe them? You should definitely delete them before submission. So 2 things I would do. You have access to the class forever, but if it were I, because I don't trust anybody and anything on the internet, I would make 2 copies of this. 1 copy that you can use as a template in the future, and another copy which is your working. And again, the welcome to the template, make a copy of this template, all of that goes into those details, and specifically navigating the slides talks about what to delete. I would definitely delete all the blue in the slide. It's a lot of noise once you start doing this. From Cap, question, is it possible to do more than one site? I currently have 3 projects I'm working on, which are all very different. Possible, unadvisable. You want to focus on the PDC to learn the permaculture process. You do not want to overload yourself with multiple sites or multiple areas. If you have a large site, I would even recommend that you truncate it down and say, here's the entire site, but here's my design site focus. The reason for that is permaculture is a survey course, even if it's a professionally directed course. So generally, this course is directed at people who want to do this as a career or want to add it into their career as a toolbox. So we're focusing on that conversation. It's still a survey course. We're still going through the buffet of permaculture and tasting climate and topography and all of these different amazing fields. And after a PDC, my experience and clients' experience and students' experience has been, now we know enough about what we're going to go back to and maybe what we'll specialize in as a business. And we can talk about that towards the end or anytime through the office hours, which is a great time to do that. Bjorn, what's a large site? Mine's 14 hectares. Yeah, you're getting onto the larger side of it for sure. It really depends on your focus and if you have any experience doing this before. So if you're brand new to landscape design, if you're brand new to planting a tree, and you're looking at 14 hectares, my questions to you would be, what do you want to accomplish by the end of the course? Chances are you're not going to have a detailed design by the end of the course. You'll probably have a rough outline, like generally what shapes are going where. This is going to be a shelter belt. This is going to be grazing area for ruminants or animals. This is going to be the orchard. This is going to be the garden. This is where we're going to capture and store water. This is going to be the earthworks. You're generally not going to have a working detailed design or working drawings, which is, here's the entire layout. You could put it down to the half meter or the 1.5 feet. So at that scope and scale, Bjorn, if you're that large and if you haven't done this before, I would focus on the area around the house. But I leave it to you. You can spend a couple of conversations here to look through everything and see what's what. One thing I wanted to point out here on the right-hand side is previous student examples. So these are all the examples from previous students. And it's really exceptional to look at students that have similar Cope and Geiger classifications, which we'll learn about, USDA plant hardiness zone, same state. Is it a digital or is it a drawn? What's the scope of it? Or specific to a specific area. Some of these have highlights, so great water analysis, great cross-section, but highly recommend going through these and taking a look at all the different ones that are there. So you can look at, and then there's some high graded ones that are there on the right hand side as well. Go back to my notes here. Design site. Yeah. Any other questions about design site before we move on to expectations? Feel free to unmute or raise your hand or put it. There we are. Hello.
Hi. I've been starting to move through the assignments and I'm taking my screenshots from Google Earth Pro, and I've started to become confused about my property boundary. This is on the topic of like a smaller area within a larger property that you're using as a design site.
Right.
I've gotten confused if you want to see the property boundary or the site boundary, and like the measurements and width and height of the site boundary or the property boundary.
Totally. Okay, so great question. When we're developing our property maps, what we want to know is we first want to know what is the cadastral geopolitical boundary. Where does your sphere of influence end and where does somebody else's begin? So that's useful even if we're having a smaller site, just to show what is the larger boundary of where our influence is going to be. And then we'll see a design site boundary. For the majority of people, they're going to be one and the same. So if you're going to do a smaller area, I would just add into the legend design site boundary and then put a smaller area. Great question. Thanks for that one. What is Climax community and where do you find it? Yeah. So let's go to that. And these are all in the tutorials. So I go into this as well. So specifically here on the first assignment, we have a number of elements here. And in the tutorial, I talk about, you may know these now, or as you go through, let's say, the climate assignment, or as you go through the soil assignment, or as you go through the local plant survey assignment, you will find different elements here. Basically, when we're looking at Climax community, we're taking a look at a biome or an ecological region. Now, North America has been divided into ecoregions all the way down to kind of sub-regions, and then some states and provinces have been subdivided further. For other countries, it's a mixed bag. Some countries have taken a very specific interest into ecological assay and classification cataloging all of the different elements, but not all of them have. So sometimes if you can't find digital resources for that, sometimes you have to reach out to conservation groups, local biologists, basically saying, I'm in this course, I'm really keen to learn about what is the climax ecology of this region because it's part of our work. Why is it important? When we take a look at ecological land design, which is what I call what I do, and permaculture is just a subsection of that. It's a tool in a toolbox. When we know the biome, or when we know the ecology of an area, that ecology is a template for anything we might do when it comes to agriculture or any sort of land design. So if I'm in an area that has native ribes, currants, or has native rubus, which is the blackberry raspberry family, I know that cultivated varieties are going to do really well because that native blueprint, that natural blueprint is there. If I'm in a place that has a lot of deer are graziers, I know that deer graze on grass and they also graze on trees. So chances are goats are going to do really well there. If we're in a prairie ecology, and mostly we're talking about the middle section of North America or some of the middle sections in other countries, we're going to probably see native graziers, and having those graziers is going to then prompt us to say, well, we could probably graze things like bovidae or cervidae, cows, different types of horses, maybe alpacas. It really makes the conversation for us quite easy because so much of what we do is about looking about what is and then working with what is. I joke with my clients, it's not so much a joke, but they take it as funny because I say I'm an advocate for the land first, I'm an advocate for their money second, and I'm an advocate for their wants third. Because I'm a regenerative land designer, I work inside of an ecological framework. I'm looking at what the land natively wants to be. What does it want to be as is? I was working on Vancouver Island, which is on the west coast of British Columbia. And a friend of mine was having to drop something off at a bison farm. And so we dropped off. The gentleman had seen me speak before at conferences and CD Saturdays and things like that. And he says, hey, I really want you to take a look at something. Would you mind? And you'll find this as you start to get into this work, people will find out what you do and they'll ask you these quick moments. And it's like, sure, let's take a look. So he takes me out to the back 40 of the property, and we're looking through some of his pasture, and there's a wetland. There's a little creek in the wetland, which is the effect of the creek upon terrestrial landscapes. And he says, I really want to turn this area into total pasture. What should I do? And I said, well, give me some time. Let me sit with the land and walk around with it for a bit. So I'm walking and walking and walking. He comes back after 15 or 20 minutes and he says, so what do you think? And I look at him and I go, well, before there were humans in this landscape, this area was a wetland. And this mountain here collected and stored rainwater, and it came down through rivers and runlets and sheet flows and came and channelized into the stream and then came through this area. And once there was humans, this was a wetland and was probably worked with and used as a wetland. And after humans are done on this planet, and trust me, we have our epoch, we will rise and fall like all life has on this planet. It's 4.5 billion years. 99.99% of all life that's ever lived on planet Earth is no longer alive. So the architecture of life on our planet sees the rise and falls of different species, and there will be the rise and fall of us as well. And so I said, after humans are done on this planet, this will be a wetland. So I wouldn't necessarily try to change that this is a wetland, because you can't change that mountain. Instead, I would work with it. I would probably terrace it. I would probably plant food for your family on the lower terraces because it'll always be wet. And on the higher terraces, I'd probably plant what's called tree fodder. These are perennial plants that produce usually high protein or high mineral leaf content or bark content for grazing animals, be they cervidae or bovidae, be they, cow form or deer form. And he looks at me and he goes, for the last 10 years, for the last 5 years, I spent $10,000 and spoke to 5 different consultants, and you've made the most sense out of them all. So much of what we're doing is experiencing the landscape as it is, as we want it to be. Now, I can guide you to start to open up your perspective on that, but there's no book you can read that will develop that for you. It may, there may be books that suggest an epiphany to you, that shake you out of our modern cultural story and norm, that we can use technology and design ourselves any future possible. But what we really need to do is slow down. We need to ratchet down the thinking brain, and we need to ratchet up the experiential, the intuition we have. And it's incredible how many of the top designers in the world that I've worked with within the permaculture, regenerative landscape, agrarians landscape, holistic management, use intuition and use their own sense of a land over time. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get moving forward here. Somebody asked, so yeah, climax community. Cypher, great question. Long answer, great question. Christian, my site doesn't have a structure on it yet. Since it's a construction site, should I make up a structure in the beginning or during the design process? Great question. So with all of the initial design assignments, you should treat your land as is. Don't suggest anything. Take a long time to have long, thoughtful, protracted observation. This is one of the main tenets of permaculture. Be in an observational mindset. Tom Brown, a tracker and guider and an instructor of ancestral skills down in the States, has this wonderful conversation, which is, it starts with a question of, what does the human mind sound like? Or pardon me, what's the loudest thing in the forest? The human mind. What does it sound like? It sounds like a trash can going down suburbia at 3 a.m. So much of what we're trying to do is quiet that mind to just be observational at the beginning. So if you don't have a structure on your site, don't suggest one at the beginning, like your zones and everything else. If there's nothing on your site, chances are your zones are going to be really easy. It may all be a zone 4 or zone 3, which is less frequency of human initiative and frequency of walking. So I wouldn't make up anything at the beginning. Wait until the design portion. Great question. QN, I have a half-acre site in the tropics, Sri Lanka, which I just left last week. I started doing some work on it, but I'm now physically away from it for the duration of the course. I do have a contact on site who I communicate with multiple times a week. It is my preferred site design. Can I still use it for the course, or should I lean on a local option, Canada, which I can as well? So QN, I would say what I would do is, if you have somebody there who can run the soil tests, and if they can do site assay and start to work through plant identification, which we all have to learn. It's just a part of the territory if you want to do this type of work. So, and we'll talk about how to do that as we get deeper into the course. But if you have questions, feel free to. that's fine. But just know that you are walking into a potential design conversation that would be more difficult because you're relying on communication, 1, weather, 2, because of communication, and then 3, somebody locally to do the work that you need to do and to do it accurately and all the rest of it. So if you feel like you can do that, great, no problems. And if it's your preference, fantastic. But if not, no worries. Great questions, everybody. Maeve, see you later. Take care. All right. I'm going to go back to my notes. Okay, expectations. So let's manage some expectations right off the bat. You're about to take a 20-week course, which is one of the longer courses that you can take online within permaculture. It is the most design-focused course that you can take online, due in no small part to Andrew's efforts and myself to really focus on the design portion of the course. But it took, after my first PDC, it took 3 to 5 years to feel comfortable enough to do a full design and feel like I didn't need any help. So don't expect after 20 weeks of working on one project, you're going to be 100% feeling confident and clear. So I want to manage those expectations. There's a question in the personal survey about managing expectations. So I want to make sure that this is clear. A PDC is your first point of entry. It's not the last. David Shaw said that PDC is a great place to start, but a terrible place to stop. And it's also a tool in the toolbox. You'll find in this sphere, this world of permaculture, there's a lot of people who have become self-appointed deities and really encourage deification. I'm not one of those people. A friend of mine said you'd be a lot more successful if you just said you were the guru. And it's probably true. You can definitely charge more, but so much of what I do is about helping people to develop critical thinking skills and really question what's going on. So it runs cross purposes to my essence. So really make sure to have not only just an open mindset, but a growth mindset to be able to question beliefs that you've long held had. If you don't know that trees create rain, you're about to learn that, and that might shake you up a bit. There may be a couple of things that really do shake you. William, I'm aiming to move a farm to a regenerative system, 185 hectares that I know well. There are farm buildings with permanent occupants living on the site. I'm sorry to make you repeat yourself. Do you think I should just focus on the farm building yard or for the sake of this coursework? William, that's a big site. If you're trying to, it's really a question about what you want to do with it. So with everything that I'm working with, and when I do good fit calls with clients, I ask a series of questions. I say, first and foremost, what's your problem? What's the problem you're trying to solve? So similar to your conversation, what's the problem you're trying to solve on this site? What's the thing that's wrong that you want to right? Second, what are the obstacles to solving that problem? Is it education? Is it time? Is it money? Is it labor? There's lots of different obstacles. Third, what's your ideal outcome after this? So if William comes this way and the OSU PDC course comes this way and you meet and then you move on from each other, what's changed? What's the ideal outcome? So you have a better general sense of the site or the immediate area around the house. And then finally, what's the cost of not solving this problem? A lot of people don't think about the cost of not solving the problem. They get obsessed with the problem when the cost of solving it is almost nothing, or the cost of not dealing with it is nothing. And then on the opposite side, some people leave a problem go for years and the cost is substantial, and then it becomes blown out of proportion. This is a great example of this is when I design fencing in places that are either humid to tropic. I tend to take down the area around the fence with a skid steer or other type of earthworking machine down to the parent soil. So we move through the organic horizon and down to the parent material. Because if you do that, you resist the amount of vegetative growth that will take down the fence over the years if you don't want anything on it. So it's one of those pieces that's important to think about is what's the problem you're trying to solve. So if you want to really focus on learning the design system of permaculture, I would make it smaller. And then on some of the bigger mapping assignments, things like microclimates, you may want to do the whole site, but you'll have a focus on that area around the house. Tamara, are we mapping solar aspect? And if so, in which slides or sections of the PowerPoint? My site is very hilly and I have a feeling sun exposure will be a challenge in certain spots. Yes, so we do a basic solar assay. That's in the sector analysis. And that's a useful assignment because it gives us a sense of up and down in terms of what's the degree on the landscape the sun comes up during the solstice in the winter and the summer? How high does it come in the landscape? And then where does it come down? Now, if you're focusing, or if you have an issue where you have more, if you have more obstacles to solar access, there's another tool which I use, which we don't have in the course, which is called a sun shade analysis. And a sun shade analysis is basically you're going out every few hours during a season. You usually have to do it in both seasons. And you're basically mapping out where the shade and where the sun is. And usually you use red and blue, because what will happen is you'll have degrees of purple in between the two. But we can get into that when we get closer to the sector analysis. I'm just noticing time here. But yeah, I would definitely say look at sun solar analysis. The other thing you can do, and you can do this digitally, or you can do this in person, is there's some great applications. One's called Sunseeker that I've used for years. And Sunseeker is an augmented reality application which puts you in a location. So it uses the GPS of your phone, which uses moving constellations of satellite to pinpoint where you are, plus or minus 5 meters up to 10 meters, depending on the accuracy. And then it'll give you a sense of where the sun is. And you can get a sense of where that sun stops in any location of your site. So you can get a sense of mapping that out as well. Mindy, is there any such thing as too small of a site to start with? No. So we've had folks who've done a balcony. They've done permaculture on a balcony. They've done permaculture on just their kitchen or their life. They've approached it as, well, how do we become more interactive with our culture or community? We've had urban folks who have used their neighborhood and been conscientious about that conversation. If you are an urban dweller and you're excited about that sort of urban retrofit transformation, highly recommend checking out a gentleman by the name of Mark Lakeman, and his work with the City Repair Project out of Portland, Oregon. Mark and I are chatting about doing an in-depth course in the next couple of years, and really focusing on how do we transform cities back into villages, because we've lost that conversation in most of the modern world, or Western civilization, quote unquote. So no place is too small. I've also had folks who've just worked inside an apartment because they didn't have a balcony, and we worked on internal systems of growth. So things like window farms and composting and bokashi and vermicomposting, all of those things. So no, there is no small site. Wonderful. Great questions. All right. How to succeed. So how to succeed at the course is to ask for help, and ask for help early. So I'm going to make a caveat for that. After you've watched the tutorials, after you've looked at other people's assignments, and after you've gone through all the materials in the template, and you're still confused, ask for help. No problem. My pet peeve is when people ask me questions and everything's in the tutorials and the templates, because I've spent many hours. I apologize for all the time you're going to spend with me. It's unfortunate. I once had a mother be like, my kid always goes, it's the guy, when she's listening to it in the living room. Hey, everybody, Javan Bernakevitch with All Points Design. I apologize. That'll be in your head. But once you've gone through the tutorials and you asked all the questions, or pardon me, you've gone through all that, then feel free to ask questions. And if you need help, if you need some one-on-one time via Zoom, happy to do that. If you want to wait until you submit an assignment and ask the questions at the end of the template, because there's a Q&A slide at the end of each one of the assignments, feel free to do that. If you want to come to the office hours, and if you want to prep questions, that's fine as well. All of that is good. So no problems on there. Work on developing your designer's mind. So we have a joke among designers that people don't pay us for what we give them. They pay us like cows are paid to chew the cud. It's not the milk, it's the process that's the development. So we spend a lot of time thinking and rethinking. And permaculture design is really a spiral. You spiral out to an idea or a conversation, you come back, you take a look at any of the topographical overlays, and you spiral out and you come back, and spiral out, come back, and spiral out, and come back. It's a very spiral type of design conversation. And so what we're constantly doing is having all of this amazing randomness on this side, and we're slowly getting closer and closer and closer to the design. And so it's really about being observational and removing options and having that conversation with ourselves. One of the things that's really important that can really trigger a lot of people is we've had a very interesting conversation within our species about native and non-native and plant racism, which is what I call weeds. All these plants have a function. Every single plant has a function in the landscape, and seeds have been moving the world over long before humanity. I just came back from the Galapagos Islands, reread The Voyages of the Beagle by Charles Darwin, Origin of Species, and an amazing book, if anybody really wants to get into what evolution is and isn't, called The Beak of the Finch. And what was fascinating is that all of these species on the Galapagos Island, most of them are endemic, meaning that you can find them in other places, but their specific type of adaptation and evolution into a specific species off of other finches, which is the common animal that they use as the example out there, is because seeds and animals were carried via currents, were carried via birds, were carried via storms to these islands, and they evolved. So we see endemic species that have had centuries of evolution. And if anybody wants to dive into this, I highly recommend reading Dow O'Ryan's book, who's an instructor in this course, called Invasive Species, talking about what's an invasive species and what's the conversation with that. I'm not for or against an invasive species. I'm specific to what will happen if I put this species in this landscape. The burden is on the designer. The burden is on the designer of what we put into a landscape. One of the plants that I use a lot in my designs is gumi, Eleagnus multiflora or Eleagnus umbellata. And they are nitrogen-fixing shrubs used mostly in the temperate climes, some in semi-tropics, that develop a little berry that has higher lycopene than tomatoes, which means if you're at risk for testicular cancer, it's a great herb to use. But generally, once you get into the midway through the US, it becomes an aggressive invasive in waterways. So generally, you'll find that as we're talking about species, somebody in the class or somebody in the conversation, you'll read something that says that's an invasive species. Everything's invasive in a certain context, in a certain conversation. So just be conscientious that the burden is on the designer to be conscientious about what we're placing and where. Ask questions, so ask lots of questions. And it can be super useful to reach out to somebody else in this class, be it if they're in the same climate zone, if they're local to where you are, and just ask them, hey, do you want to be a learning buddy through the course? Maybe we could meet every other week and connect and converse and chat. The great thing is you guys have access to each other via our group, so you can reach out to somebody who has a like-minded conversation, read through the introductions, look through the assignments, and start to have that conversation with others. Again, I just want to reiterate that all assignments are due on March 11th, 2023 at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and there are no exceptions to that. You can be late throughout the course. Generally, if you're over 2 weeks late, I may not give you full feedback. You may just get a grade. So if you want full feedback, make sure to submit within 2 weeks. There is no penalty as of yet. We have suggested there should be penalties, but generally life happens and that's okay. If you get behind in the class, there's always the option to re-enroll in a future date. There's a small fee to do that. Or you could just decide you're not going to get the certificate. Now let's talk about the certificate. Any guesses on how many times I've been asked for my permaculture certificate in the last 15 years since I received it? Any guesses? 0. Well done. Up until 2 months ago, it was 0. I've never been asked for my permaculture certificate from any client or any organization I've worked with. Recently, I've been developing my submission for a senior diploma in permaculture through the Permaculture Institute of North America, and they did ask for my permaculture design certificates. Fortunately, I had a major flood in Canada, and I lost all of my paperwork, so I don't have my certificate anymore. Digital copies, everyone, digital copies. So why do I say that? Is that nobody's going to be asking you for it generally. I've been hearing more and more that as you're starting off, people want to know where you were taught and all the rest of it. And I've heard that people really like that it came from Oregon State University because we have a really high standard of design degree and our instructors are all practitioners. Whereas there's a lot of people who teach PDCs who don't practice. So you will get a certificate if you complete the course, and completion is every single assignment is submitted. get an 80% on all of them. You do all of the peer reviews, and you're generally on time. I'm probably the most lax on that because I just want to help you guys understand and work. And I know life happens. It happens to me all the time. So, I'm very open to helping you guys figure out what you need and where you need it. So that's when everything's due. So just remember, that's all good until March 11th at 9 a.m. And then there's no more extensions. So be conscientious about that. Okay. Any other questions before we do a little template and canvas tour so I can start questioning? Do we not get a badge? You get a certificate. It'd be great if we got badges, though. I like that. I used to be a Boy Scout. I think we should get badges. Christian, oh yeah, can you give us a quick insight on how the peer review works? Yes, indeed, I can. Okay, well, it looks like we're kind of pushing towards Canvas, so let's go there. Canvas is a wily beast of a learning platform. I'm not here to say I endorse it. I am like you, I have to use it as well. So there are things about Canvas that will drive you insane. It's not perfect in any way, shape, or form. And so I'm saying that I share your frustrations before you have them. So I'm going to open up a previous class. We have concurrent classes. So we're usually running half of one class and half of a new class at all times. Does that mean you can come to the off week office hours? If you want. It just means that I will always prioritize the students in that class before I answer one of your questions. Generally speaking, it's best to be with your cohort. Okay, so let's talk about the peer review. Actually, let's start with just Canvas at large. Okay, so when you get to Canvas, when you get to our group page, so let's go to discussions first. This is our group page, and on our group page, there's some pinned discussions, and then there's some other discussions. So these are all of our different assignments, and some of them should not be here. For some reason, 7 populates 3 times. You guys can't see this. That's just on my end. So first and foremost, excuse me, and I'm guessing most of you have seen this already, is we've got OSU's office hours, my listing here. So generally a couple days afterwards, this will be up and you can take a look at it previous office hours, or you can go right to my YouTube channel. For those attending, and thanks so much for everybody who read this, because a lot of people are live and it's great to see your faces. It's hard to speak into the darkness of the internet, so I appreciate that. Then we've got our question document, and be aware it's a live document so you can edit it. We've got our timing. Again, every once in a while, people don't show up and I stay on for 15 minutes. And if nobody shows up, I log off. So if you want to use these office hours, please do. The last class I had, for some reason, halfway through, people stopped showing up and one person came and I basically helped them design their entire site. So it's an opportunity to get a lot of value. Then we've got the meeting login ID, including the password and all of those very good things. Let's talk a little bit about the Google document, just so that we can have a quick conversation about this one. So Zoom login is at the top again, previous student office hours. Here's an example of a good question. So they've put in their name and their location. They've bolded it, bolded highlighting. I talk about bolded highlighting a lot in the course. There's a tutorial about it. Basically, bolded highlighting means you are highlighting by bolding elements of your text, so that way the reader is drawn towards it. Then always give me a link to your project site, especially if your question is about your design site. So these are some examples up here. And then, oh, people are putting their questions here. Okay, mistake number 1. Cool. So as we get down here, we have resources. So I've got a master resource list that I've been compiling for 15 years. You can take a look at that. It has different sections like plants and plant identification. It has podcasts now. And then I'm developing some web resources. So this is a great place for people to look for resources. People are going to get frustrated about IDing plants. I've got a whole tutorial about that in the local plant survey, but these are the applications that I enjoy using. And then these are some areas. I like using Reddit for plant ID or Facebook groups. So if I don't know something, and there's lots of plants I don't know, I post it and say, what is this? I found this in this location. It's about this big. What is this? So there's that. These are some great books that people have asked about a bunch, which we can talk about if we want to. These are some upcoming courses of interest. So there's some other courses. Once you finish a PDC, you then move on to sort of advanced permaculture design courses or advanced courses. So this is about erosion. So if you have a very erosive landscape and you're trying to slow erosion or stop erosion, this is an amazing course. We've run this twice before. This is a brand new course called Aesthetic Design for Ecological Landscapes. It's with Jamie Wallace. He's an instructor in this course. Jamie and I will be offering this very soon, within a month. And it's really about how to make beautiful landscapes when you're doing ecological landscapes. Why would we make beautiful landscapes? Because beautiful landscapes get noticed and beautiful landscapes get tended to. This is a really interesting conversation. The more beautiful it is, the more tended it is. And permaculture has a history of being illiterate. It's a landscape that has literacy problems for the majority of society because people like rows and clumpings and groupings and things like that. Then we have designing and implementing multifunctional hedgerows with Jude Hobbs coming in January 10th. So if you've got a hedgerow or a privacy head that you're focused on, that would be good. Also, schedule all of these dates below into your calendar. Okay, so for everybody who's been putting their questions up here, and if you're typing right now, stop. I'm just going to copy all this. These are examples. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to, pardon me. I'm going to try and get all of Deanna's conversation. This was just the example. And then I'm going to put this down in this this assignment or this office hours date. So we'll get to that. Okay, I'm noticing that I've got 8 minutes to go before we're done, but I want to answer the questions. So for everybody, I will be staying later and I will answer all these questions. If you have to go, feel free to go. No problems. Great to see everybody. But I want to spend the time to make sure everybody's questions have been answered. So I will spend a little bit more time on this. Great. So that's that. Let's go back to Canvas. So we've got the Zoom office hours. This is the previous students. So let's go to ours here. So previous students that we've done, I'm also going to put up an open discussion. So if you want to just chat with each other about something random, I'll put that up there. And then we have introductions, which we've all done. And then we get into our assignments. So I've already seen some mistakes starting up. So within our assignments, I'll show you some people who've done this really well. At the top here, you're going to see all the assignments that are due. You'll have personal survey, design site, and climate survey, which are all due for this week's assignment or this lesson's assignment as it's been worded here. That means I want you to submit all assignments together. Please never submit just a partial assignment or just one assignment when there's a group. If you did this, no worries, it happens. You're just starting this conversation. So for everybody who just put the first one, definitely go back and do what Christian did, which is here's the link for this week's assignment. So let's see if the permissions have been set properly. They have, because what I'll be doing is I'll be going through your entire assignment. And so this way, all these assignments are done perfectly here. We've got a good sense of all these pieces. And what I'll do is I will be going through this and giving you feedback. Sometimes I'll mark early. Always feel free to submit early, and I will give you that feedback. Now, what about this peer review? So what you'll see is on this one, so we had Louise from the previous class, here's my assignment. And we had people say, I just finished reading your surveys, truly fell in love with your forest fairy. And this is a peer review. So you have to review 2 other people's assignments every week. You have to read through them and give them feedback. 2 ways to do that. You can either, and I think Louise turned on commenting, and I suggest that we do this. I don't know if she did, but I think she did. Okay, I don't know if she did. But one of the ways to do this is if you see something cool and you highlight it, yes, you can actually comment directly in their design site. So you can put a comment in here and say, I love ecotherapy as well. Great work. So you can do it that way as well, but I don't read those. So you can do that, but what you'll want to do is at least put something here, and that's how we mark the peer review assignments. So basically find 2 people's assignments and comment on them. Should you stick with the same person throughout the class or look at others? I would say at least one of the 2 should be one assignment or one student you should stick with. And the reason for that is you'll find that if you stick with one, you'll see an evolution and a progression, and it'll be really helpful for you to see that progression and that conversation develop, and it'll help you with your work as well. So I think that was one of the questions we had, which was, what about the peer review assignments? Yeah, Christian. So there you go. That's the peer review conversation. And then again, just so we're clear, this is what a good submission looks like. Here's the link to this week's assignment. You can also go directly to that title page. And the one thing I'll show here, let's see if somebody, usually this happens. There we go. So in this conversation, so who is this? This was Callista. So Callista submitted, and you'll see this little thing that says your feedback. This will be a video that you can download or view. If you want to keep them, download them immediately. I delete them within 2 weeks without notice. And they viewed that, and this one, there was a lot of things that were missing. So basically they said, here's the things I changed. And one of the things I asked for is where were the changes made? So what slide? Because I'm not going to remark the whole assignment. So just make sure that that's done. This is all found in the discussions. Sorry, Mindy, what's all this? What are you speaking about? This is all found in the discussions. Feel free to unmute if it's easier just to respond. The peer review. Yep. Yeah, that's all there. So you should be good on that one. Great. All right, so we've gone through Canvas. We've had that conversation. Awesome. So what I want to do now is just quickly I showed you the template. That's pretty self-explanatory, and the tutorials are there. Okay, great. Let's blitz the questions because there's a number of them. So first question was from Linda. For those in temperate climates, are there activities we should do now before winter hits us? Yeah, and I've got the link there. What are the dimensions for the slideshow presentation if we're using a different software other than Google? Okay, so generally, if you want to have a printable design assignment as a portfolio afterwards, and if you're working in the US, it's 11 by 17. If you're in the world, it's usually an A2 or A3 sizing for paper. Bjorn, talking about Indigenous history. Yeah, so generally when we're working in Europe, we're speaking about the individuals who were there before modernity. And the reason for that is we want to get a sense of what were their practices that we may want to bring into the conversation. So I would recommend looking into that. I will visit my design site on October 14th. Before then, I can definitely do all the work with maps, but I don't have a lot of pictures. Can I add them after the deadline? Absolutely. Generally, if there's anything you can't add onto the template, just make a note saying, I have a site visit at this time, and I will add later. If you don't make a note, I'm going to assume you missed it, and I'm going to dock your marks. If you leave a note that says that's not there, I'll still dock your marks, but I know that it's coming. Deanna, unfortunately, I won't be able to join the call. No worries. Curious about how septic beds and wells impact growth of the landscape. I'm not sure this is covered in the course later on, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a short answer, and then let's pick it up again in the water conversation. So when you're taking a look at septic, so if you have a septic system and then a septic leach field, generally we don't want to plant any trees or shrubs, anything perennial in that area. Generally, those types of plantings will get into the inner workings of the leach field, and they will invalidate the functionality of that leach field. So generally, we want to leave a good swath of land. How much land do we want to leave around it? Depends on what you're planting. So definitely research into the plants you want to put around it. And if they're perennials, if they're trees or shrubs, just be conscientious that usually canopy plus anywhere from, or times anywhere from 1 to 1.5 to 2 is going to be the root zone as well. A lot of fruit trees, the root zone will be just a little bit outside of canopy, but for other native species, it could be quite a bit more. Generally, septic fields are pollinator wildflower gardens for me. Generally, I leave them as wildflowers, either self-seeding annuals or perennial herbaceous. Great question. Jane, there's a large tree on my site that is not native to the area. Munko puzzle. Oh, nice. Cast a big shadow over the space. The property owner should possibly removing this tree. There's no definite plans. I would like to know how to think through whether removing. Principle, I don't want to remove tree. Okay, great. So monkey puzzles, if it's a female, produce seed. And monkey puzzle seeds are basically pine nuts, and they're amazing. The females generally have an unfortunate odor, which can kind of be a vomity odor that people don't really like. So I would be just conscientious if there's some functionality to this tree before we take it down, because it does produce a lot of shade. In the Netherlands, you're going to be kind of more into Arctic circles, so sun is definitely going to be of higher value, but there's likely going to be subspecies we can put below it. So Yeah, first off, if were I would say, is it a female or male? If it's a female, I might think about getting a male so that way it can pollinate, and then we can start to get a yield out of that tree. That's not just shade. Logistic questions, but I will be on holiday November 21st to December 9th. Should I work ahead to complete assignments on time? I'm concerned I will lose points from commenting on others' work since I'll not be online. No, this is the neat thing about the OSU PDC online. You don't lose marks for being late unless you're late after March 11th. So no, that's all good. Sydney from Edmonton. I lived in Edmonton for a time. I actually moved to Edmonton on one of the coldest days in known history, which was minus 55 Celsius. For those who work in Fahrenheit, look up that conversion. It's a fun one. Also, +1 a tree removal. We have a large Manitoba maple that hangs over a garage and yard coming from the neighbors that blocks almost all the potential sunlight. Okay, thoughts on cutting most of the tree that is on the property, technically manageable or not invasive. Block the light. What would the permaculture approach be? Yeah, so functionality. Always go back to functionality. What is this tree doing? Manitoba maples are incredible for their ability to tolerate pollution. It's one of the reasons why they were planted all along the North Saskatchewan River Valley, because they have such an ability to deal with the pollution, and the fact that the dump was right there and they basically just squish it into the banks. And if you ever float down the North Saskatchewan River, you can see all the tires basically like shredding through geological pressure as they come out through the side of the banks. But the Manitoba maples do a great job of that. So Manitoba maples have a product, have a need and a yield. Their yield is they have a huge amount of wood and shade and trees and seedlings. You know, there's all of these yields. But if your focus is on your site and it's over the area that you want to do the garden, it would make sense to cut it back so that way you have access to a very limited resource in a place like Edmonton that was in the Arctic Circle in Canada up until 1945. So yeah, I would play out the conversation of what are the needs and yields of the trees, what are the needs and yields of the site. Is there any way to work collaboratively with that, or is it better to have it off? Any suggestions on soil sampling? I have to do my soil samples this week since I'm leaving the province for a few weeks. Yeah, go through the tutorials. They're pretty in depth. They go through the whole conversation. I would just follow the tutorials and then follow the conversation. If you have any questions, let me know. Also, we're most likely going to set up hydroponics of some sort in the tower garden to help produce fresh veggies and salad greens for the winter. Would this be something to work into the overall permaculture? Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I'm not a huge fan of hydroponics. Hydroponics could also be called bottle ponics, because basically we're taking and we're isolating different nutrients, putting it into bottles and then putting it into the water. I'm more keen on aquaponics. This is where we're taking the fish feces and we're using that to water plants, and the plants' roots specifically are helping to transform that feces into available form of nitrogen and to clean the water. That said, systems like that really have to be undersized in terms of capacity. You usually want to run an aquaponic system at about 70% of capacity, because life, as Jeff Goldblum said in Jurassic Park, finds a way. So there's always going to be these ebbs and flows of different types of blooms, be they pests or be they growth. And so just be conscientious of that. Also be conscientious of the energy in for energy out. I still haven't seen an aquaponics or hydroponic system that produces more energy than it consumes, as opposed to soil, which does, soil and lights. So I would just be conscientious about that. I did a lot of growing indoors in Edmonton, only because we're heating the house anyways. So be conscientious that that might be a better way to go. Maeve, I'm currently applying to jobs and may relocate during this course. Is it possible to work with the same site throughout with limited in-person access? Possible, but undesirable. I would say you're probably better off to pick a site that you will have access to, or that you have a friend or family member that can do some of that work for you if you're going to be moving. Our site is a public space. What do you recommend reaching out to? Don't. Sorry. Unless somebody has actively reached out and said, hey, we want this site designed and we're willing to be a client and we're willing to provide information. Unless that happens, you're going to be struggling to find anything through a city. Almost impossible to do. I've worked with I was doing the numbers the other day. I think I'm getting close to like 10,000 students. And every time they've done a public project where there hasn't been a request for proposal and there's somebody from the city or the county or the, whatever the governmental agency is, that's going to provide information and be that site contact, it's been really tough. So I wouldn't do that. I would instead reach out to the community, reach out on Facebook, reach out on social media and say, hey, I'm doing this course. Does anybody want a free design? especially those that may want to put it in. We'll talk about this towards the end of the course, but if you want to do this work full time and if you have no experience, the number one thing that potential clients want to see is, what have you done? They want to know your reputation. So generally, when I'm advising students and when I was doing it myself, if there was a client that would put the money into the design in the ground and I could take photos and I could have proof, I would do the work for free. So I did a dozen or dozen and a half designs for free, only because they put the design in the ground. So I would move away from public spaces. It's not that you can't do it. It's just you have to make up a lot of the what the client wants, because they're not going to talk to you. Manithia, great word, great name. That's the one. Learning Spanish and then speaking English is difficult. I wanted to make the call this morning, caring for sick kids, no problems, and also dealing with several frosts. I want to confirm the peer review portion. We review the projects posted in the discussion and then reply. Exactly. Totally. Great. Well, look at that. We're only 6 minutes over. Any final questions? Any final questions for anybody? Thoughts, queries, quotients? There we go. I'm sorry, Jane, is an obvious answer, but what is the purpose of the compass rose in the template? Sure. Let's talk about the compass rose. Great question. So in maps, we want to know what is north and what are the other directions. Usually only north is put into a map. Why do we want to know where north is? Because it gives us a sense of orientation. So that way we have a frame of reference that anybody is looking at it. So the course provides you a compass rose, but if you have a compass rose that is more specific to your site or yourself, you can replace it. One thing that I will advise is, if at all possible, keep north up. It is a convention with almost all design sites. The only time that I would give an exception to that, even in my own work, is if you can just put more information on a site, on a slide or a map by turning it. But generally, I'll turn the paper itself. So if I'm working on maps that are more horizontally based, I will turn it northerly, just so that way I can do that. With this template, that is not an option because we made everything to be horizontal. So if you want to turn this to the left, you would just grab this guy and then just turn it to the left like that. So north is that way and north is to the right. But the convention is, and the reason we have a compass rose is so that way we know what is up, so to speak, and we have that convention so that way anybody looking at it can orient themselves to the map. Great question. Great question. 2 more questions that popped up. Question number 1. Sure, there's an obvious answer. Oh, thank you. There we go. What are some good permaculture principles I can use to justify buying a drone to my wife? Okay, story time. I was working with a really well-known permaculture designer, and sometimes folks will reach out and they'll want to do values-based decision-making with me just for their lives. So that way they get a sense of what their values are, where they're going, and a good decision-making process so that way they can guide their life well, basically guided by ecological principles. I've done this work for years, and I work with couples and families, and has nothing to do with land. It's just, how do we live well? This gentleman had taken holistic management, had taught holistic management, and had hosted holistic management courses, and still wanted to work with me because I've simplified holistic decision-making with values-based decision-making. So we were at the point in the process where he developed his context, which is the values you have for whatever whole you're managing. And he had decided he wanted to start testing some decisions, which we do. One of the decisions was, should I buy a drone? So when we talk about what is the root cause for a problem, as we talked about before in the good fit call, his root cause was, I don't have a drone. That is not the root cause of the problem for getting a drone. It's, what can't you do with the drone that you potentially could do? So what is the viability of that? So I'll tell you a little bit, because I use drones for mapping, but I use them so infrequently that up until a couple of years ago, I didn't buy one. I just rented one or borrowed one from friends. So right now, and I can only speak of the DJI drones. I've only used the DJI drones. You'd have to check out other types of drones. But the DJI drones, including the Phantom series and the Mavic series, they have the ability with a third-party application called Drone Deploy or Maps Made Easy, which are the 2 I've used. I know there's others. You can run what's called a photogrammetry scan of a landscape. And if that landscape does not have trees on it, you can get down to an accuracy of about 8 centimeters. And photogrammetry is the way that maps were made generally around the world. Basically, you take 2 known points, you take 2 photographs, and through some amazing calculus, you can understand the difference between the 2 and the point that you're viewing through basically stereoscopic imagery. And that's what the drone does. It basically takes its X, Y, and Z point when it's on the ground, comes up into the sky, and as it's going over a landscape, it takes all these different photos. I have a really cool explanation of that on my website under projects, and it's the Curtis Stone Homestead. A buddy of mine unfortunately used some really terrible data. It's the contour map generator out by Verge. And unfortunately, all that information is from NASA's LIDAR mission that they ran in 2000. LIDAR is light image detection and radar. So basically, you shoot a laser down from the space shuttle and it comes back up and you get a sense of the distance. And from that, you can get a whole topography of the Earth. Problem was every single pixel was 30 meters, which means that if your elevational change is less than 30 meters, which most of ours are, then the computer did the scientific work of guessing what that topography looks like. And this is what happened with Curtis. Curtis reached out, longtime friend, runs a membership called Freedom Farmers. It's more of a politically aimed homesteading approach. And his map was so wrong, his contours were perpendicular to the photogrammetry drone work we did over top of. So that's one reason to own a drone, but only the Mavic 1 or 2 or the Phantom. You can't use the Mini 3, which is what I bought because they said that they were going to include it in the API kit, which is unfortunate. So now I have a tiny little drone, which I can fly in Canada because the piloting rules are insane and it's underneath the gram requirement. But yeah, it's unfortunate. So if you want to use it for that, that's a good reason. The other reasons to use a drone is you can use NVIDIA infrared passovers to get a sense of crop health. And generally with AI now, the resolution and the accuracy of that is getting quite good. So the majority of the drones from DJI all have that functionality, even the Mini. So if you're running large scale pasture and you're getting a sense of, well, where do I move my animals at a large scale, that can be valuable. I know a number of large scale outfits in Australia and Canada that use drone to actually check on animals. So they send a drone out to check animals and bring them back. I like using drones because they're kind of like tripods in the sky. So if you're looking at changes over time, I like sending up a drone and taking reference photos as they change. I really like that. If you're doing any sort of outreach work, reputation building work, be it marketing materials, or you're trying to share with people about permaculture, drones can be a great way to see a landscape and actually see how the water moves. Most of you will have no doubt experienced Andrew Millison and his work on YouTube, and a lot of those drone shots are so necessary. So those are the practical applications, but Kevin, the permaculture principles to justify a drone, I'm going to leave that to you, mate. I'm going to step back from that point, but I like that. William, when referencing, is there any particular system we should be using? You mean like sighting? Is that what you mean? Yeah, help me out with that, William. A little bit more information would be useful. Like APA? No, it's up to you. You'll see that basically I'm saying access date and URL. That's it. We are not at that level of what we're requiring people to do. I have pushed for it. I was once called the credible Hulk by students when I was teaching because I want everything sourced from beginning to end. There's a lot of people in permaculture that will use stories to tell their arc and their progression. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong at all. Stories are fine. However, we live in an academic proof world. And the more we can show that, the more adoption we have of permaculture. So I tend to push for it, but it's not required for this class. Great question. Tamara, any recommendations when dealing with abandoned woodlots? Thinning and clearing. My site is originally mixed deciduous, but there are 2 woodlots, one with eastern pine and red pine, and another one with cedar that borders an old growth maple forest. Regeneration tips. Yeah. Oh, this is such a big question. Tamara, I'm going to ask you to put that question into next week's office hours, 2 weeks from now, because it's a really good one. So just copy and paste that and put it into, today's the 2nd, 2 weeks from now is the 16th. Because I can go deep into that conversation. We can talk about thinning and conversations, and hopefully you'll have your aerials up by then so we can actually use your photography to reference what thinning should look like and what the needs and the yields are for your site. Once we get into client needs and wants. And once we have aerials and maps, I can give a lot more detailed feedback, because up at this point, you're going to hear the number one answer to all questions, which is it depends. Depends on your site, your context, what's going on, what you guys want from it, the growth rate. Is there a market for some of that wood? Are you using it for firewood? Is there other materials you could be using it for, like pole wood? Because maple is also one of those great trees that if you cut, it'll regenerate some of the varieties. So those are all really good conversations. Woo. Here we are, folks. 75 minutes into our first class. It was so great to meet all of you. And thanks so much for sticking around, everybody. I'm generally open for any conversation. If you have any questions, if you want to send me an email, javan@allpointsdesign.ca. Remind me what class you're in. I average on any one time working with 100 to 250 students. So feel free to remind me where you're from. And if it takes me a couple of days, feel free to be the squeaky wheel, just being like, hope you got my email, because I do process a lot of information. But it's been a great conversation today. What are you taking away from today's conversation? What's the value of participating in the conversation today? Either unmute or throw it into the chat. Buy a drone. Kevin, I like you. Anybody else? What's the value of the conversation today? What are we taking away? What are the tips and tricks that you didn't know before? Definitely going to use the drone we have. Awesome. And yeah, if we want to have a more in-depth conversation about drone usage, happy to do that in the next conversation. Anybody else want to chime in?
Scene setting was very helpful, managing expectations. Yeah, it's good.
Awesome. Yeah, I was definitely in that conversation. I was like, I'm going to take a PDC. I'll be a permaculture designer the moment I leave. That's not the case. So I just want to help everybody understand that. Jane, PDC, a great place to stop. Terrible place to stop. DJI is a great brand. Yeah, that's true. Nice seeing faces. Absolutely. All right, folks. Great to see everybody. Hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Don't be a stranger. Feel free to ask any questions, and we'll see you in a few. Take care, everybody. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thanks, Javan.
You're welcome.